So the weekday readings for Advent come in 3 blocks, 3 sections. And the first block takes us from the first Monday in Advent through its second Tuesday. That's 8 days. All the readings for these 8 days focus on the prophet Isaiah. He's the hinge here. It's the Isaiah readings that the church wants us to pay attention to during this first octave of the season. The thread that runs through these readings is consistent. You can see a steady message through all of them. They all have to do with a kind of unbelievable joy which comes after destruction and suffering. None of them ought to be read shallowly, the readings for this week. It's true, all the situations these readings describe lay out abundant reasons for thanks, riches, happiness, blessing. But none of these good things come without having to endure great suffering. The first Wednesday is a good example. We'll hear about rich food and choice wines, good news. But that reading follows a chapter that describes famine and almost unfathomable hardship. In our reading, it's not just a joyful occasion, it's a joyful occasion that contrasts sharply with a situation that made this joy seem like it was beyond hoping for. How to describe this? In all our suffering, these readings from Isaiah encourage us to lift all our suffering up to God, trusting that in a little while He can bring about redemption for our suffering. If only we trust in Him, we know that there is no such thing as a suffering too great for Him to redeem in an unimaginably good way, like the ways Isaiah describes. There's one more thing for us to pay attention to, and we'll see it next week, Monday and Tuesday. We'll hear from the second part of Isaiah's book of prophecies. It's a shift in tone, and it won't be just a promise of the time when all these good things happen. It'll change the language to say, the time's here. It's not just promised, but imminent. It's right here. I think that right now, actually, maybe more than any Advent in my living memory, my generation in this country has a conception of darkness. And so, maybe more than in a long time, we have the capacity to hope for relief from it. I mean, just look around. We've got this disease and everything that's coming out of it. Sickness and death is some of it. But the isolation, the economic ruin, and then the things the disease has just made more grating, even harder to ignore. Things that have been around, racial injustice, political strife. The list could go on. We have a better sense now, all of us, I think, of powers beyond our control, and of what it means to be helpless before oppressed by powers beyond our control. Isaiah isn't shying away from any of that. He'd understand very well what we're going through, what we're all experiencing, but he'd still promise that God's going to bring a fix. And He's telling us to be ready now. Because for those with eyes to see, there's a change coming. Prepare in your heart, He says, the way of the Lord. In our next block of readings, the focus is going to shift. The great prophetic figure of the New Testament, the bridge between the Old and the New Covenants, John the Baptist, is going to take center stage. And the message he'll give to prepare Israel for Jesus applies to us too. But in the meantime, let's rest in these readings, I'd say. Let's let ourselves be consoled by them, especially if we're having a hard time. And let's take them as a promise that there is coming for all of us, not just relief, but an answer to our prayer beyond imagining.